Hello and welcome to another episode of To Be More Podcasts as we discuss a variety of topics in and around Baltimore metropolitan area. Today, we are discussing our children. I think that many of you will be surprised to hear how many of them are living in poverty, not just in Baltimore City, but in Baltimore County and the surrounding counties. We often concentrate on the city, and of course we should, but there are concerns outside the city that warrant our attention. I am pleased today to be joined by Dr. Laurie Taylor Mitchell. She's the president of the Student Support Network, and Rina Rhyne, she's the executive director of the network. Thank you both for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, so I'm guessing that the poverty issue must be just right around the Beltway, close to the city, right?
No, that is not the case. I think that's what a lot of people may think, just because we do hear a lot about the city, and rightfully so. There are places to focus there. But in the county, we are seeing poverty all throughout the county, even in areas where one would not think. We look at areas like Towson, which typically when people think of Towson, they don't think of poverty, but really right down the road from some of these schools that you hear about, you're seeing schools with 60, 70, 80% poverty rate as we go into Parkville, Kearney. And even in Towson itself, there are children in poverty.
You said 60, 70, and 80% poverty rate.
Upwards of that.
And what defines, let's reset really quickly,
Yes.
because that just staggered me when you said 60, 70, 80% poverty rate. What defines poverty? How would we define that?
Sure. So what we look at is the free and reduced meals, how many kids are qualifying for free and reduced meals. And I can let Laurie speak a little more to that if she'd like.
Sure. So the level of poverty officially, shall we say, is defined primarily by how many children qualify for free and reduced price meals in school. And the income thresholds for those are very low. But for example, in Baltimore City, 88% of all students qualify for free and reduced price meals. But in Baltimore County, 53%, over half of all the children in Baltimore County Public Schools now qualify for free and reduced price meals. So when Rina says a place has 60, 70% poverty rate, that means that is the percentage of children that qualify for free and reduced price meals. However, that's not the only evaluation of poverty that we should be using, because we know that many families make too much to qualify for free and reduced price meals, but they don't make enough to make ends meet. And there are thousands of those households in the city and the county. And so they don't get any food assistance at all. And the term, which I'm hoping is becoming more familiar, is what are called ALICE, Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed. In other words, their incomes are low, but they make too much to qualify for assistance. And the United Way of Central Maryland has done a lot of research into ALICE households. So it's really important to realize that that is not the complete picture of poverty. It's bad enough for the city and the county, but it doesn't show the true scale of poverty in either place.
Well, in typical TJ fashion, I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent here, but it's that area, it's no different than kids who haven't been quite in enough trouble to be in the system. There are less programs for them than the ones who've been in trouble, and parents often want to know, what can we do with our children? And then you have the parents that don't quite make enough money, but don't make they make too much money to qualify for a program. So you're stuck in that no man's land, right, and don't get the help or assistance that you could use. So yes, thank you for breaking that down. So totally understand where the pockets of poverty, and you're naming communities like Kearney, which is like close to White Marsh and those areas that people wouldn't historically look at and just see. They don't see the vacant homes, and you won't see the violence that you might see in Baltimore City. The words that are associated with this hunger nowadays, and there I just said it, hunger, food deserts, hunger, food insecurity, food apartheid. What's the difference in that terminology, and what are some of our young people in the schools facing?
So I'd like to talk a little bit about what the definitions of those are, and then I think Rina can speak to some of the specific examples that we see of how students cope or try to cope with food insecurity. So hunger is something we all experience. Everybody is hungry for breakfast, lunch, dinner, or whatever. But food insecurity is really a very different dynamic. Food insecurity means that a student doesn't know necessarily when their next meal is going to be. Maybe they don't have enough lunch money for school. They don't know if there's food in the house when they go home. They don't know if there's going to be food over the weekend. If it's the end of the month and the benefits are running out, there may not be food in the household at the end of the month. Food insecurity is worst in the summer because children are not getting free meals in school. And so all across the board, summer is the worst time for food insecurity. So this is a tremendous amount of anxiety and stress that is on a child who may not be hungry right then, but they don't know when they're going to eat, or maybe they didn't eat very well. In other words, food insecurity is also a lack of access to nutritious food. Did that kid have candy or potato chips for breakfast or lunch or dinner or whatever? What are they eating? So food insecurity is a driver of massive physical and health disparities in the school system for children. And so I'd like Rina to talk a little bit about how we address food insecurity in our school programs.
Sure. So at the Student Support Network, which is our organization, we are in 20 Baltimore County Public Schools. And the way our program works is that we set up what we call rooms of support in each of these schools. And within those rooms of support, one of the main items we have is food for kids to take for evenings and weekends or for after-school snacks, because those are the main times where kids are not receiving food. So if you think about a child who gets a free meal for breakfast or lunch at school, that's great, or a reduced price meal, they may experience food insecurity because they don't know if they're going to be getting dinner that night. They don't know if Friday comes, if they're going to have food throughout the weekend. And just to go back to what we talked about with some families make just a little more than what qualifies their child for free and reduced meals. So the amount right now is $51,338 a year for a family of 4. If a family makes under that, their kids will qualify. If they're making $52,000 in their family of 4, their kids are not going to qualify for those free and reduced meals. The biggest reason we're seeing a problem like that is when we look at something like the MIT Living Wage Calculator, which can show you how much a family of 4 needs to make in order to just make ends meet, not save, just the basics of rent and food. We're looking at, in Baltimore County, before taxes, that family needs to make over $103,000. So you're seeing that big gap between the kids who qualify for free and reduced meals and what a family really needs to make ends meet. So a lot of those kids in the middle, that's who we're really helping. We're helping all the kids, but those kids in the middle who don't qualify for any sort of assistance. So going back, as I said, we have food in those rooms, so kids can take them home, throw them in their backpack, and take them home. We also help our schools do food distribution. So Thanksgiving's coming up. We're giving turkeys, we're giving non-perishables. So kids with these extra days off have enough food to last them throughout the break, and also so they can feel like their peers having a Thanksgiving meal.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I mean, again, listening to that is staggering, because $55,000 is still not a ton of money for a family of 4, but it throws you out of that threshold to get that assistance that you might very well need that can take a huge load off of you. With that, because I jumped right into it because it was so interesting, how did this organization get started? And, what's the brainchild behind it?
I'm going to let our founder talk about that.
So in December of 2015, I found out that my son's former high school, Lock Raven High School, we lived just up the street. About 1/3 of the students there were living in severe poverty, 300 kids, and I was blown away. I was appalled by that statistic. I had no idea how many children were living in poverty there, and it was the December holidays, and I was very distressed about that, and I put out a little email asking for 4 volunteers to help 5 families. And in the space of 13 incredible days, assisted by the social worker there, we helped 25 families. We got 125 volunteers. We raised thousands of dollars, and the gifts and donations just poured into the school. And so by the end of that tremendous experience, I thought, all right, here is this tremendous need that nobody knows about, or very few people. Over and over, I kept hearing, I had no idea that this was a problem. So there was this need, and this is how people responded when the need was made apparent to them. So we started out with 1 school. So in 2016, we became a nonprofit, and we slowly grew in the number of schools. And then when the schools closed for the pandemic, everything in our schools, our rooms of support, as Rina mentioned, everything shut down. Within 1 week, we took all of our resources and pivoted out of the schools into distributions in 3 places in Baltimore County. And for 15 months, we did distributions once a week, and we distributed over $7 million in food and supplies. Wow. Through donations, help from Baltimore County government, and through grants. So when the schools opened again, we couldn't do the distributions anymore, so our programs went back into the schools. And so we now have programs in 20 schools. We have a full-time executive director and staff. And so I think with the awareness of this problem and people wanting to help, we have been able to grow. But the more we grow, the more we realize what the unmet need is. At these 20 schools where we have programs, there are over 10,000 children in severe poverty at these 20 schools alone, and over 6,000 of them are in extreme poverty. That is, they qualify for SNAP, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, as it's called. So just at these schools alone, there's a tremendous amount of need that we are trying to address. I just wanted to go back to your questions about food insecurity. Mm-hmm. For the first time, the Youth Risk Tobacco Survey asked students themselves if they suffered from food insecurity. So how do you determine what food insecurity is? So there were 2 questions. Did their family worry that their food money would run out before they could buy more? Or did they worry, or did the food their family bought not last and there wasn't any money to buy more? If the answer to either one of those is yes, that family suffers from food insecurity. So Baltimore City, 43% of all the students that were asked said they experienced food insecurity. In Baltimore County, it's 30%. So that means that that's a staggering number of children every single day in school. Every minute they worry about either being hungry or food insecure is a minute stolen from their education, where they can't concentrate on the education they deserve. And it's a huge equity issue, because students of color are at much higher risk for food insecurity than white students are. And the physical and mental health risks associated with food insecurity, like obesity, drug use, being depressed, making a suicide plan, fighting at school, carrying a weapon to school. All of these risk factors were associated in this survey with food insecurity. So it is a massive problem. And if we could make sure that every child in our region had enough to eat every day, our culture would be transformed.
Yeah, and I'm glad you just said it so eloquently there. And one of the things is right on the front page of your website, which is studentsupportnetwork.org. 1 in 2 Baltimore County Public School students live in poverty. They lack the basics that kids need to focus, learn, and thrive, and struggle to make the most of school. All of these things are domino effects to what we talk about and make headlines daily, which is the violence and those bad decisions. And I talk often about it when we talk about the schools and these kids that are getting medicated for ADHD and all. Some of this could be back to food insecurity. Who knows? Have you seen any sort of difference with any of the children? I know that you might not be tracking the kids every single day or over the years that are able to get some of this food that is provided to them.
So something that's important to our program is that we maintain confidentiality, so kids and families can feel like they have dignity. Mm-hmm. So we do track data about what is given out, but anecdotally, we can tell you that when we hear from the social workers and the teachers, the stories that we hear again and again about And I can just give you an example. I had a school where all they requested was a $10 alarm clock for a child that the family couldn't afford because this kid wasn't going to school on time. We were able to meet that need because we go beyond food. There is so much more that we do. We heard back from that school a couple weeks later, and they told us that kid was getting to school on time every day because of a $10 alarm clock, something that I think we all take for granted. Wow, there's so many stories I could really tell you based on this, but the number of stories that we hear, the number of thank yous, this made a huge difference in concrete things like a child getting to school, that truly immeasurable, but how it affects self-esteem and confidence. A child who doesn't have shoes, that they can't even walk in the door or participate in gym, we're able to give them shoes, what that does for them. And I think we all can remember back to middle school and high school and how important something like shoes or a backpack are. It's more than just being prepared for the day. Being prepared for the day is absolutely what we address, but it's about giving that child a sense of worth, that someone believes in you and wants to invest in you.
Right. How frustrating is it, though, at times, seeing the political climate? We're in the midst of a political climate right now, and high point right now during election season. But when you hear universal free lunch or free breakfast or whatever as a political issue, and knowing you're on the front lines of it, and see that it changes the focus of kids. And there are just some families who legitimately can't afford to give their kids something nutritious. It's not just about throwing a Pop-Tart in front of them.
Well, that's right. And I think it's one of the things with regard to access to, or universal access, is that Baltimore City, for several years now, has implemented the Community Eligibility Provision, or CEP. So CEP means that each child, regardless of income, is offered universal breakfast and lunch. And so 100% of all the schools in Baltimore City have been designated as, hunger-free schools, because at least while the child is in school, they are offered universal breakfast and lunch. In Baltimore County, only 87 schools have implemented CEP. That is a huge jump from just a few years ago, which is wonderful. But ideally, all schools should be able to offer universal breakfast and lunch, which they were during COVID, because the federal government expanded that program of universal access, which most unfortunately expired this past summer. So we're now back in the soup of not Baltimore City, but Baltimore County. All these families have to apply now, and all the the paperwork to apply for free or reduced price meals. We're back into the world of lunch shaming, where if a child doesn't have the funding, there's a certain kind of meal that they get, and everybody knows what that is. Some children simply won't eat because they don't want to face that stigma.
It's crazy how we don't connect the dots, because I can remember back in my time in school, you saw a kid that got lunch tickets, and you knew the kids that didn't get lunch tickets, their parents could afford to pay for their lunch, so you didn't get lunch tickets. And you thought we got past that. And we aren't making affordable housing the way it used to be made. We're not plastering it on the side of it and calling it a project or anything. So we're still stigmatizing in some locales, and instead of getting past something as basic as food, is what you're telling me.
Well, yes, or another really important program is Maryland Meals for Achievement, which is a universal breakfast program, which is offered by the state. You have to have a 40% rate of free and reduced price meals in order to qualify for that. But the really important part of that is they offer a component called breakfast after the bell. In other words, most breakfast programs in schools start before school starts. But if your bus is late, or you're late, or you just can't get to the school on time for the breakfast, that means in breakfast after the bell, the child can eat, grab and go, and they can take it to their classroom, and they can eat in their classroom, in their homeroom or whatever. So that's a huge improvement in getting these children breakfast. But the state does not completely fund that program, so we have schools in Baltimore County anyway that qualify but don't have that option.
And I want to speak to what Laurie just said, the importance of breakfast after the bell. There's a few reasons. When we picture kids getting to school, we think everyone's getting there by the time the bell goes off. But we know there's been issues with transportation, with buses bringing kids to school and getting there on time, and the shortage of bus drivers. Lots of kids are getting to school after the bell, and especially the way programs work in the county. So right now, Baltimore County schools have what they call ESOL centers for English as a second language. It's not necessarily at the child's zone school. So they're taking a bus from much further away to go to a school to come to that ESOL center and potentially getting to school later. And if they qualify for free breakfast, if they haven't made it in time for class to start and they don't get breakfast after the bell, this child's going to be hungry until lunch.
Wow. Have we seen any data on, let's say, like the advanced placement students and their level of poverty or not versus general education students? Is there any data available on that? I know I put you on the spot with that. I was just curious to see if we're seeing that performance. We know that performance is impacted by the lack of food sometimes.
Yes. That's a very good question. That is not data that we have looked into right yet, but an excellent question and worth looking into. Something with the Student Support Network, and what I think is really great, and why I think Laurie is really wonderful. She started this program at Lock Raven High thinking it was just going to be, here's this holiday program. Okay, fine, we're going to do this program at one school. I don't think in her wildest dream she thought we were going to be at 20 schools and on a podcast in this day and age. But in such a short period of time, we have really grown, and a lot of the community has jumped on board with that. And so a lot of what we're looking at the Student Support Center, Student Support Network, is things like you're asking is, what are the long-term impacts of this? We know there is research that absolutely says meeting those basic needs for kids, and Laurie addressed this earlier, addresses a whole host of issues. At a minimum, it's giving children better access to education, which can only benefit them in the long run. But it's just something I wanted to point out was we started very grassroots just 6-7 years ago, and we have grown a lot because of the hard work that a lot of people have put in, because of the good people in the community of Baltimore County. I say it again and again. I think working for this organization has renewed my faith in the world. The number of people that donate, in-kind donations, local businesses who reach out to us and say, hey, we want to help some of your families.
Not only a younger organization, so to speak, when you think about it. 2015 surprised me as well, but doing it and conquering it through the pandemic as a younger organization is more than commendable, because being able to stay together and push through that has to be tough with something like this especially. Can you give us an idea of some of the meals that might be prepared or given to kids as you talk about some of the restaurants or places that support you? Just an idea of what the kids might get. I'm just curious.
Oh, sure. So this can look a number of different ways. So when we speak about our rooms of support, we keep a lot of non-perishable items, but we keep items that kids themselves can easily make. So a middle schooler who goes home and has a parent or parents who are working outside the home, multiple jobs, they often have to make meals for themselves. So it's spaghetti sauce, pasta. We try to get a protein in there. We'll do like a canned chicken, canned vegetables. So at least we're getting all the different types of food groups. We do a lot of fruit cups as a snack, or good quality granola bars. When we do our bigger distributions, especially before the big breaks, as I mentioned, we're doing turkeys for Thanksgiving, but we're also doing produce boxes. So they have fruits and vegetables that last them several days. One of the things that we do, and we're, again, so lucky about community partners, we have a lot of houses of worship who will create dinner bags for us. So they will put all the ingredients in the bag, and they will put recipes in that are easy to follow for a child or for an adult, so it's not complicated. So the best example is pasta, but even our staff has taken their time to go and say, okay, what do we need for chili? That's something hearty. It's got beans in it. It's got vegetables in it. We can gather that. We can put that in here. We've also worked with a lot of local grocery stores who have been kind enough to donate grocery gift cards for those perishable items that might be needed to add on.
Yeah.
So that is a really big issue, the last thing that Rina mentioned is choice. In other words, that's one of the things that one is robbed of, I think, being poor, is the dignity of choice. So there may be cultural and all kinds of issues that decide or define what a family wants to eat or should eat or whatever. And so grocery gift cards, we use those sparingly, but they do offer families much more choice and flexibility. And if a family is in an emergency situation that Rina finds out about, that's often the only way to get them food really quickly. For example, if they have been evicted and they're in a hotel and they have no food, but they're within walking distance, or they can get to a grocery store, that is the way to help them. Or after a fire, or simply they've run out of food in the house, and that has happened too. And especially during COVID, that was a huge problem. So flexibility in what we can provide is something that we value very highly, and we are sensitive to the school staff advising us about what families need in terms of food.
I was going to speak exactly to that. Different schools have different needs. While we think that there is a foundation for what we provide in our rooms, the basics, but then we have some schools who have a larger Hispanic population. Mm-hmm. So when we're looking at food for them, they're making different types of requests than other schools may make. And that's something we really try to meet and serve and let the school guide us on what their families need. Because again, we're going back to, yes, we're feeding them. We want to decrease their stress, but we also want them to feel valued. So culturally, we've gotten requests for halal meat. That is something we really try to meet, because we want that family, and especially that child, to feel they're valued for who they are.
And I think that's a very important point, to try to meet people where they are, and especially culturally and maybe even religiously at some points. Is there an aspect, and this is not even all on you all. You all do more than enough with just providing this necessary infrastructure. But I'm curious, is there any sort of education component coupled with this? And the reason I bring it up is because we want to provide some sort of healthy meal. Now, even people who diet all the time cheat, but want to try to change the mindset of how people eat. When they develop more freedom of the choice of food. Is there an education component to any of this?
So there is. So with the food we provide in the rooms of support, and so the way our program works is we help set up the room, and each school has 2 lead volunteers, is what we call them. So these are just people in the community who say, I want to help the school, I want to work with your program. They help keep that room of support stocked. They tell us what needs to be in the room, and we work with them on what's going to be in there. Across the board, all these volunteers are, we want fruit, we want vegetables, how can we get access to that? So just by providing these different types of foods and providing the recipes for a meal they can make, we feel there is an education component there to say, hey, we've got a protein, we've got vegetables, this is how you make a meal. It doesn't just have to be in the microwave, this is how you can do it. That is sending a message about healthy eating. In addition, we have had other programs reach out to us who do health education, and we do provide that information. So we do the work we do, but we also provide flyers in our room of support or in the dinner bags for, hey, go online to this website for free information about nutrition and the right things to eat that goes beyond, the Doritos or juice boxes. And not that we don't provide some of that too, because kids are kids and they want to enjoy those things, but to have a balance and a mix of things. And that's what we are, just as an organization, we value, and all of our volunteers that work for us have that same value, that we want to provide the kids good quality food.
Yeah, just to follow up on that a little bit. So there are things that we don't buy with our precious donations and resources. We don't buy candy and junk food. Now we didn't buy it, but there was a wonderful organization that found out that a lot of kids couldn't afford a birthday cake when they had a birthday. So they made birthday bags, and these were, as you can imagine, a huge hit for families who could not afford a cake mix and oil and things like that. Yeah. But most of the time, as Rina said, we try to lead, so to speak, by example, by the kind of food that we provide.
Yeah, I mean, and a
Yeah.
birthday cake is once a
Exactly.
year. I mean,
Right.
it's certain things that are,
Yes.
you know,
You just have to
just
do it, yeah.
more every day putting a bag of Takis in for the, you know, that.
It's
Just
not nutritious.
so as long as young people are starting to get the foundation of understanding what vegetables and protein and fiber or whatever are for, you know, I just think that that's something that's been missing, just for adults, even for people who have the financial resources to go to the store today that don't necessarily know. It's just a missing, you know, gap there.
And honestly, right now, I think we've all seen it when we go to the grocery store. The prices are higher. Things are tougher right now. And we are seeing that with the requests we get from our schools. This year, start of school, we are getting far more requests for individualized help for a family. So we have a room of support. But if a social worker reaches out to us and says, this family is really struggling, we are hearing about families living in tents with multiple kids.
Oh, living in tents.
Tents with multiple kids, living in hotel rooms while they're waiting to get into some sort of shelter, because a lot of the legislation, as Laurie talked about, a lot of the legislation that was happening on a temporary basis when we were in the thick of COVID, the eviction prevention, all of that has sunsetted, and we are absolutely seeing the effects of that in the work we do. And so we've talked a lot about food, but it really goes beyond food. It's a roof over a child's head. We all know it takes so much that
There's no
you
doubt
have to
if
put
you're
into
having
a child.
food insecurity issue, if I'm using it in the correct terminology, that's one of your problems, not the only problem.
And this leads to, housing insecurity is another term. Same concept. We think homeless, we think someone's living on the street, but housing insecurity is, I lived here with my aunt one day, next week I'm living in a hotel, next week I'm living in a shelter, and the stress that causes for a child, for a whole
So
family.
you have a child who has these housing insecurities, food insecurities, and these stressors that, quote, normal. I hate to say normal kids, because if we're talking upwards of 40, 50% of kids living in poverty, that's a stress that's actually relatively normal amongst a lot of children. Coming to school with that stress now, they're not as focused on what they should be focused on, which is learning.
And they should be able to focus on being a
Right.
child and exactly what you said, learning, not the stresses of, are the lights going to be on this evening so I can
Right.
do my homework?
So actually, Lights On reminded me of how much we have learned from the school staff. In other words, we don't have a lot of interaction with students directly for the reasons that Rina said. That does happen occasionally, but because of privacy and confidentiality, we want to respect, of course, the students, and also because they're minors within the school system. But Lights On, we found out that families couldn't afford light bulbs, so these kids would go home and it would get dark and they couldn't do their homework, I mean, literally. So we stock light bulbs in a lot of our rooms of support now. With regard to homelessness, Rina's gotten at least one request, I know, this year. Well, a family was evicted. They're now looking for housing, but they're in a hotel. What happens to all of their possessions? They can't afford a storage space, so everything would have been on the street. So now, because the Student Support Network is paying for a storage space when they get their housing, they are not going to have to start all over again from scratch with building up possessions to move into new housing. And I think if you think about that for a child, losing all possessions and the familiarity of a bed and so on, how catastrophic that is for a child. I mean, the evidence for the effect of homelessness on education it's just overwhelmingly negative. One experience can set a child back months or years. So if we can prevent homelessness, if we can pay a part of a utility bill so that family doesn't have to leave that home, we try to do that, or we cobble together with other organizations that Rina knows about to pay that next month of rent so that family has some breathing space to try to find whatever funding they need to stay in that housing. We do our best to do that, because homelessness is a catastrophe for children.
That's heartbreaking to hear. I mean, to think that all their possessions gone just like that and starting over again. And it happens. And one thing, there's so much more to learn, but one thing that we have learned today, that there are going to be some people surprised. I know. that poverty exists basically in every corner of our area. Wherever you live, it's around the corner from you. And if your child goes to school in Maryland, they likely go to school with somebody, if not many people, who are living in poverty and don't know where their next meal is coming from.
You're exactly right. And something I also wanted to mention was we talked about all these thresholds, but our program doesn't do any sort of means testing. And the reason we don't is we don't know when someone's situation changes overnight. If you think about a situation where there's abuse in the home and a parent takes the children and leaves, if the income was coming from the home and now parents moved out with the children, suddenly overnight, they need food. They might need clothes. They might need a whole host of things. So we know these numbers don't tell the whole story. So when we talk about these 53% of kids in Baltimore County Public Schools experiencing poverty, we know it's more than that because so much can change overnight.
Right. Yeah. Well, one of the areas on the website, which is, again, the studentsupportnetwork.org, is get involved. And people can get involved in various ways. I want you to briefly tell me, because donating is one big thing. If you want to do it from the comfort of your couch, you can go to the website now and donate. And you've heard the various ways that your money will be put to good use, and helping a child not have to get brand new toys or a brand new bed is like, I mean, how could you? Fundraising, being an advocate. Talk to me about the advocacy and the volunteer roles. What can people do?
Sure. So I'm going to speak about the volunteer roles, and then Laurie, who helps lead our advocacy committee, is going to speak all about advocacy. And there's volunteer work within all of that. Okay. So as far as volunteering with the network, we have long-term positions where you can be a lead volunteer, like I mentioned, at a room of support, being the person who helps, talks with the social worker, make sure the right things are stocked in there. If a kid's having an emergency, work with the social worker to put in what we call an order through us. There's also the one-time opportunities. You know, the holidays are coming up. We need people to pack those dinner bags, pack those non-perishables that can go to schools, and we need volunteers to deliver those to schools. There are all types of volunteer opportunities, and I encourage your listeners to go on our website, and when they fill out that volunteer interest form, they can pick, I just want to transport food, or no, I want to work year round and work in one of these rooms of support. There are so many opportunities, and we really try to meet our volunteers' interests. And we find time and time again volunteers coming back to us saying, this is so meaningful and so fulfilling to work right here in my community and help people right here in my community.
And before I jump into advocacy, I wanted to ask really quickly, are you opening up any more schools, or is it more of a funding right now, and we want to stick with what we got and maximize that?
So as I said before, we have grown very fast. So right now we're just taking a pause at 20 schools just to evaluate our next steps. We are definitely doing as much as we can in our 20 schools. And I also want to say, while 20 schools is our main focus, we do serve other BCPS schools. So if a social worker from a non-network school, not one of those 20, calls us up and says, hey, I've got a child who, through the foster care system, has just come to our school and they have nothing, we will help them. We have an emergency fund to help that social worker help that child. So while we don't have a room of support set up in their school, we still can help them. So as much as we focus on our 20 schools, we really are a resource that's available to the social workers and community school coordinators at all BCPS schools.
Excellent. And on to advocacy.
Yes. So advocacy has been a core part of our mission really since the very beginning, because with all of the distressing statistics that we've discussed today, as you can imagine, who wants to stay there? Who wants to keep living in this status quo when so many children are living in severe poverty? So we have a wonderful advocacy chair. Her name is Tamlin Kelly. She is a social worker, and she and I help run basically the advocacy committee, which primarily lately has been focused on access to food. In other words, how can we create more access to pre-existing food programs for not hundreds of children, but thousands of children, because there are thousands of children across the state and in Baltimore County that need help. So I would say I'll focus on one of our, in my view, great successes this year, which was increasing access to a state program called Summer SNAP for Children. Summer SNAP helps children in extreme poverty during the summer and one break when food insecurity is at its worst. So each child gets $30 a month in the summer months and $10 a month over the winter break. That's only $100 a year, but for a child in extreme poverty, that money really can help. So last year in Baltimore County, there were 450 children that got funding through this state program. This year, it's over 30,000 children. We testified at every budget hearing in the county to advocate for increasing the funding available for Summer SNAP. The state came through, and Baltimore County government under Johnny Olszewski came through in a big way as well. And so now thousands of children in extreme poverty are going to get this needed money in the summertime and in the winter break. So we are really working to think about how we can move the needle at the local and the state legislative levels to increase access into programs that already exist. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are a lot of different ways with better funding at the state and local level that we could increase food access for more children. And food is relatively cheap if you think about it, as opposed to infrastructure and administrative costs and buildings and so on. So food is the floor. That's what we're really focusing on right now in terms of advocacy.
Oh, well, people have heard the multiple ways that they can get involved. So you can get involved financially, you can fundraise, you can volunteer, you can be an advocate. But this is our children. So I always suggest if you're going to complain about them making too much noise or being juvenile delinquents or not going to school, there are ways to help keep them in school because they could be hungry. You never know. 20 schools right now. The elementary schools are Baltimore Highlands Elementary, Kearney, Featherbed Lane, Halstead, Mars Estates, Owings Mills, Pine Grove. The middle schools, Cockeysville, Dumbarton, Loch Raven Technical Academy, Pine Grove, Stemmers Run, Woodlawn Middle, and high schools include Dundalk, Loch Raven, Owings Mills, Parkville, and Woodlawn High. And a pre-K to 12 is Battle Monument. And it looks like a Shepherd Pratt school system in Glendon, Reisterstown campus. So you're spread out all over Baltimore County. Sure. So don't let this misnomer that the poverty issue is a Baltimore City issue or inside the Beltway issue or a city line issue. It's not. It's all over the county, all over the state. So thank you for educating us on this very important issue. And moreover, thank you for what you are doing and the commitment to it. It's a big deal.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. We really appreciate it.
Yes, and thank you all for listening to this episode of the To Be More podcast. I'm TJ Smith, and you can find this podcast and others on WMAR2news.com. And just click on the podcast. I want to thank Dr. Laurie Taylor Mitchell and Rina Rhyne, the Executive Director of the Student Support Network. And you can go to the studentsupportnetwork.org for more. Thank you for joining us today, and we will talk to you very soon again on another episode of the To Be More podcast. Thanks again.